right, so Dr. Hull, could you share with us the process or the processes that you've used in doing research here in the Caribbean?
Sure, sure. I started out working in the Caribbean in Bahamas in 2003, 2004, working in technical vocational education. And it was more of an exploratory qualitative research study that I did at the time. All of my work has been with the Inter-American Development Bank here, but in that particular study, we were interested in whether or not individuals are being prepared satisfactorily to go to work out of the TVET system in Bahamas. And it involved trying to help them upgrade their science and maths in the secondary schools to prepare people to go on to do more vocational training.
So what sort of study was that?
It was more of a qualitative study where
qualitative
we were, yeah,
study.
and it was a planning study also at the same time to help the IDB prepare an investment into the country of the Bahamas at the time. After that, I did some work in Trinidad and Tobago, where we were looking at why teachers were leaving the workforce. As an educational psychologist, I'm frequently asked to investigate questions related to education and schooling. And so one of the things that the IDB noticed is that there was a brain drain occurring of teachers. They were leaving the country, a lot of them going to New York, places like that, to take other jobs.
Not jobs in teaching.
No, they were taking jobs as teachers, as qualified teachers. They were leaving the country and going elsewhere to teach, is what we found.
Okay.
And so that was...
Because of course I would think that that says something entirely different than if they were leaving teaching entirely.
Yeah, no, they weren't. They were leaving to go and teach elsewhere because they were trained there in country and they could get a job elsewhere where they were getting more pay. So the brain drain thing in the Caribbean is real. And,
I was just thinking then that wasn't much of a study, we could just say.
Yeah. Yeah. But we needed we
Yeah,
do this research
No,
studies
I
oftentimes to
understand.
verify these things that we think are happening, right? So that was another one. It was after that that I began to work in Jamaica for the first time, and that was in around 2008, investigating the National Youth Service.
So the Trinidad study was what kind of study?
The Trinidad study was a quantitative study, but it was more of a quantitative cross-sectional study because all we had was historical data that we could get from the Ministry of Education on the teachers that had been there, and we knew which ones had left and which ones hadn't. So it was more, looking at reasons why some stayed and some didn't.
Okay. Can you say what came out of that?
I could, if it hadn't been for the fact that it's been over 15 years since I did the study.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
And then you came to Jamaica.
I did. I came to Jamaica in 2008. That was my first opportunity to do a large-scale randomized trial in the Caribbean. And we had the very good fortune of having a very cooperative staff at the National Youth Service that assisted us in pulling off the study. And we were able to do a fully randomized trial with just individuals as the unit of analysis, which made it a beautiful study because it was just so elegantly simple. And we found that the program was having some reasonably good effects on the youth that were coming out of the program at the time. We were able to implement repeated measures with that study so that we were able to see what happened with the youth even 6 months beyond the time of their involvement. And I didn't realize it at the time, but we were starting to see some decline in the youth after the program discontinued. But we didn't pay as much attention to it then. We've since conducted additional studies in youth development programs. I've done one in Belize, and I've assessed the National Youth Service here as well as the Career Advancement Program here, and I've done two studies in Barbados on a program there. It's a sports-based youth development program, and the picture is beginning to emerge in a very interesting way that as youth are involved in these programs, we see growth occurring for the intervened youth up until the point where the program stops. And then we begin to see a decline. As they go back to their communities and become involved in the activities they were in before, we see a lot of these youth assets beginning to drop off, even to the point where they're non-existent. Wow. Again, 6 months to a year after their participation in the programs. So it speaks to, I think it's a very interesting phenomenon that's occurring, and we need to do more to investigate what has to happen with these intervention programs to prolong these growth trajectories for youth. If we don't do that, we're treating development as just this thing that occurs while they're in the program, and that's not what happens. Development occurs beyond intervention, and we've got to put in place ramps that help people continue to progress even after their initial involvement.
So who is this? So what you're doing is program evaluation.
Yes. Yeah.
So who designs these programs? We in the Caribbean are designing these programs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Based on whose recommendations? Because we do teach program evaluation.
Well, the National Youth Service Program has been going on here in Jamaica since, well, I think it existed for a good period of time back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was discontinued for a bit, and then it was re-engaged again in the late 90s and has been in existence since then in various forms. It has changed the way that the program's been delivered, and it continues to evolve. And the reason that it evolves is because of some of these studies we've done. I mean, one of the things that in the last 3 months, I've had a chance to work with the NYS again while I was here, and have learned that it's been now brought in under HEART. And so as a part of the HEART Trust NTA, youth have this option to then transition directly into programs that will help them gain NVQs. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be particularly important for those youth. I think that is the kind of trajectory we're talking about, is dovetailing these programs that are youth development programs that are taking these youth that are on the street, that aren't working, they're not in school, and helping them continue to progress beyond the initial program that the NYS provided them, where they gain some basic work skills, to where they're then transitioning into more programs where they're gaining qualifications.
True. I am wondering though, putting somebody in from one program into another, I think that the acid test of a program is when he or she can stand on his or her feet. It is not, am I successful in another program? So I'm not so sure. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm not so sure that you're actually measuring success of program when you put them in another program and then say, oh, the gains that you made in program A haven't gone away. The truth is you're measuring gains in program B. It's not, because what I'm saying is that if they were able to go out there and do what they were doing, without help from any other program, because that ultimately is what you want people to do. You don't want them to be moving from program to program. So I don't know.
What I'm saying is I think that the intervention effects need to be more prolonged. I mean, or that the intervention itself needs to be extended.
Definitely.
Because what we're finding in the Caribbean is that even though the program may last 6 to 7 months, that's not long enough.
No, you want them to be.
They're not standing on their own, as you said, after that period of time.
So the programs are failing. Basically, the programs are failing if they're not, because that should be the deliverable.
But they're working initially, So I mean, what we're finding though is we find big or reasonably large effect sizes at the conclusion of the program. At that point, it depends on how you want to assess the success of the program.
Yes, I know.
If the way you measure success is whether or not the individual is able to stand on their own, then yes, you're right. The program is failing. I'm not sure that everyone would agree that's the best way to measure success.
Really?
Well, because resources are limited. You've got to be able to do what you can with what you have.
But exactly because resources are limited, you want the thing to have success.
True.
From back one,
And it depends on how you define success. And so that's why we collect as many different dependent variables as possible, because success can be defined a variety of different ways.
Okay. Well, All right, I'm saying the programs are failing, but of course, without being able to come up with any other. But all right, so tell me, so you've done Jamaica, Barbados, Belize,
Yeah, that's pretty
Trinidad.
much the extent of it. I mean, that's my body of work in the Caribbean is in Bahamas, Trinidad, Belize. I've done. Let's see. In Belize, we did an initial study with the schools there that was funded by the Inter-American Development Bank and the Japan Fund. Um, and then we moved to it was moved to a large scale rollout, the program, and I also evaluated that, and that was done with about 6,000 youth
Mm.
throughout the country. Um, we we also did some program evaluation of that same curricular program within um, the correctional facilities with the youth at the time, and evaluated what was going on with a youth center that was constructed there. So, um, yeah.
Okay. And I remember you talking with Dr. Campbell about work in Barbados.
hmm
What was that work?
So we're examining, again, it's a program evaluation. We did two different studies. One was a longitudinal study, and that was a quasi-experimental study. And this was a sports-based youth development program that was, uh, it's called Eganar. It was actually developed by Pele in Brazil.
Oh.
And so that program has been in operation now in in Barbados for 4 years. And so we did one quasi-experimental study, and then we did a tracer study, and we actually did the tracer study as a quasi-experiment. So we were able to find youth that had been in the program and youth from that same time period that had not been in the program, and statistically match them, determine what the program effects were.
Okay. All right. And that was a successful program, I hope.
Yeah, to some extent, but we found some of the similar kinds of characteristics with that program that we found in Jamaica.
Okay.
So again, this is kind of verifying this intervention in
All
the
right.
Caribbean
So tell me
phenomenon.
then, what sort of study would you need to put together to come up with the answers, the solutions to the problem of programs not having a good return on investment? And by return on investment, I am saying that the programs don't give long-term
Yeah,
change.
I wish I had an answer to that question. I don't know whether it's a study that needs to be put in place or that there needs to be a collective um, meeting of the minds on these youth development programs as to what's involved to try to produce these effective outcomes. And that may be something that there's certainly a conversation, and it seems like it's a conversation that needs to happen throughout the entire region about how to deal more effectively with
Policy.
this unattached youth problem that we
Okay.
have, and what what can be done to resolve that in a longer term sense. So, because if you think about it, every youth that we take that's unattached, that's not working, not in school, they're just not contributing to society. Every one of those you can take and turn into somebody who is productive and contributing to society.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting an enormous swing, right,
Mm-hmm.
towards societal benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're wanting to try to do. And I don't think that conversation has happened yet, and I think it's something that certainly needs to happen. And I don't know that it's a research project at this point that's needed. It's more of let's look theoretically at the kind of programs that we've put together and build a new one that does what we think will work, and then we can design a research study once we think we know what we have that would cause the change that we want.
I'm tempted to go back and ask you. You remember that question we answered earlier about the template, the procedural template?
Mm-hmm.
I'm tempted to ask you, all right, so what's the procedure for that? the HRD unit could weigh in. Well, certainly the Department of Sociology, Psychology, Social Work,
Certainly.
because we're HR, we're the nexus, we feel, of the whole department, but there are sociological issues, psychological issues, and social work of dealing with the vulnerable populations. So that certainly would be something that this department, as a department, should
Absolutely.
take on. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, thank you so much, Doc. I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank
Certainly
you for having me.
doing research methods, well, certainly doing statistical analysis doesn't seem as scary.
Good.
I hope that people watching the video will feel that way.
Hopefully
too.
they see the utility of it.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.